I'd like to call the meeting to order for the Planning Commission meeting. For the record, Commissioner Gonzalez and Schrader have resigned. So I believe the City Council, after the election, will appoint the 2 new commissioners. Okay. Gina, can we have a roll call, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. Chairman Zarguni,
Present.
Vice Chairman Miller,
Here.
Commissioner York,
Here.
Commissioner Mandel is absent, Commissioner Salazar Garza, here, Commissioner Munoz,
Here.
and Commissioner Motagi.
Here.
Quorum established.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to open the public comments regarding any general public comments. Is there anybody that would like to speak regarding anything or any items not specific to the item? None. I will close it and moving on to approval of the absences for Commissioner Gonzalez. Do we need a motion for Commissioner Gonzalez or moving on since he's resigned? Do we need a,
Since he resigned, you can definitely just,
okay.
we'll move on.
So
Thank you,
moving
sir.
on to approval of the minutes from the Planning Commission on October 5th, 2022.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as presented by staff.
Second.
We have a motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the consent public hearing. For the record, Commissioner York will be abstained from item number 9. So if you'd like to present number 1 and 8, and then we'll do 9 separately.
Yes,
Thank
sir. Good evening, Commissioners. Mark Orozco, Senior City Planner with Development Services. I'm going to be reading into record consent items for plats, items 2 through 7, actually, because number 8 is the waiver. Starting with number 2. Rancho Vista subdivision, it's Unit 27. It's a final plat of 11.33 acres. Item number 3, under plats, it's Rancho Vista subdivision, Unit 29. This is the final plat of 8.86 acres. Number 4, fifth quarter industrial park, Phase 1, Block 1, lots 1 through 5, final plat of 11.52 acres. Item number 5, Greenwood Heights, preliminary plat of 31.31 acres. Item number 6, a conditional preliminary plat of Oso Creek Corner Phase 1, preliminary plat of 103.299 acres. Continuing with number 7, Ebony Acres, Lot 30A, and the accompanying sidewalk waiver, item number 8 for Ebony Acres, Lot 3A. The plats meet the UDC regulations and the Texas Local Government Code. All consent items are recommended for approval on the plats. If you have any questions now, I can address those questions at this time.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any question for staff regarding item number 2 to 8? No question, okay. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Does anyone here would like to speak regarding any of this item? None. I will close the public hearing and will entertain a motion.
I make a motion we approve items 2 through 8 as recommended by staff.
I second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 9, new zoning.
Under zoning, item number 9, we have a rezoning of a property at 14909 and 14913 and 14917 Grenada Drive. This is a rezoning by MCJs and Associates LLC. The ordinance is rezoning property, as I mentioned before, on Grenada Drive. It's located along the northwest corner of the intersection of Running Light Drive and Leeward Drive. The rezoning is from the RS6 Island Overlay, Single Family 6 District, to the RMAT Multifamily AT District with the Island Overlay and a planned unit development. The staff is also recommending approval on this consent item. You can address any comments to Andrew on this particular rezoning.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any question for staff, commissioners? None? At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing regarding number 9. Is there anyone that would like to speak regarding this item? I will close the public hearing and entertain a discussion or motion.
I make a motion that we pass item number 9 as presented by staff.
We have a motion and, we have a motion?
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the director's report.
Nina Nixon Mendez, Assistant Director. Good evening. I wanted to announce that this Friday is our Development Services Task Force meeting. It will begin at 9 a.m. and it takes place at the 6th floor conference room of City Hall. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, ma'am. Any future agenda item?
I've got something I'd like to talk about and perhaps create as an agenda. So, and part of it's a question to Andrew. Somebody told me that there's been an application for a building permit on the the Carmelite Nun Old Folks Home property.
Yes, the old Mount Carmel Assisted Living Center.
Correct. Sorry,
Yes,
Mount
sir.
Carmel.
No worries.
And it's going to be a convenience store, correct?
One of the proposed developments at the hard corner of Everhard and South Alameda, yes, it is proposed stripes.
Okay. The thing that's always been concerning to me, and what I've always tried to do when evaluating zoning cases, is try not to focus on any kind of submitted site plans or anything, because obviously things can change. And it has the opportunity, or it has, what happens is people look at it and go, okay, yeah, I can live with that. But unfortunately, with zoning cases, you know, there's other things that can be done in specific zoning districts. And that's why I've kind of like special permits, because it allows us to really evaluate on what's actually going to be built there. And I'm all for property owners' rights, and you know, I think people should be able to build what they want to build on their own property. However, there's certain liberties that you relinquish whenever you live in a city and you've got tap water that turns on and stuff like that. So everybody has to play nice in the sandbox together.
Sure.
And I know I've received a couple of calls about that particular piece of property, and, you know, hey, I thought it was going to be a shopping center type of thing. So I'd like to, you know, if it was me, I would disallow any submission of any site plans or, you know, any pretty pictures or anything like that, and just, you know, I would much rather blindly look at it as, you know, this is the zoning we're requesting. These are the types of businesses that can operate within that zoning, and then make the judgment based on that, instead of pretty pictures that have, you know, have a tendency to sway people's views on a particular project. And so that's my thoughts. And then also with the leaving of Commissioner Gonzalez and Schrader after the election, we're going to have a relatively fresh set of faces here. And if we could maybe pick up the ball on the zoning 101, or or perhaps do a seminar for all of us to come together, you know, on a weekend, something like that, to where, you know, we can all kind of come together and bring it all together.
Like a retreat almost.
Like, yeah, kind of a retreat.
Sure.
And I know that's an expense, and I know it's an expense of people's times and stuff like that, but I think it'd be good for the whole commission to kind of come together and just kind of remember what we're here for.
And I want to echo Commissioner Miller's point. I do want to request also on the zoning cases that, is it possible that we can definitely just look at the case by case as far as the zoning and what kind of usage we are working on, rather than this fancy pictures and presentation that's sometimes been presented?
Absolutely. It's,
Um,
not to interrupt you, it's a chicken and egg argument. And I say that because it's usually when we get a phone call from a random citizen, it's, well, what is the zoning case? And give them the ups and downs of it. It's going from, residential to office. Well, what are they going to build? It's always the very next question. So it's, while I completely understand, and I agree, our purpose as staff is to treat zoning cases from very much an academic perspective. Does it fit in the category? Is it allowed? Is it consistent with the surrounding neighborhood? Is it consistent with our plans? And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter the use, because very much as both you as Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chairman have said, we ultimately don't know till the day a building permit is submitted what it's truly going to be. So yes, we can remove site plans, or maybe leave it to the part of the applicant to make their case, and we're going to purely focus on the academics of this is the zoning it is, and this is what they're proposing to going to, and these are all the uses allowed, and we can leave it at that.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem for the applicant to come,
Make
present
their
their
case.
case.
Sure.
But I don't want this to become a common things that they constantly submit this site plans or fancy pictures, I would say, and kind of change the perspective of, from a commission standpoint, what they're actually trying to present, whereas in reality could be so many different things. So I'm all about the transparency. So if it is possible, I would like to make sure that with the zoning cases, we can specifically focus on what can or cannot be.
Absolutely. I would just, with the caveat that special permits and PUDs are required by code to have some form of site plan. So for instance, the case we had last week is tied very specific conditions. So in those, I would still say we need a site plan in there, but any others that are just zone A to zone B,
And the special permit, we don't necessarily change the zoning. We keep the
Correct.
base zoning the same, with
Correct.
giving them the structures of what they can build. So I'm okay with that.
not a problem.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller.
And furthermore on that, to expand on that, I'd like to see a little more information, and I mentioned this at the last meeting, a little more information on the notifications.
You bet.
And I know it's very difficult to, tailor-make the notifications to a specific zoning case, but I think that the public at least have, a link to the presentation or something to where they can, better understand, because right now it's just CG1 to CG2 or IL to, whatever, and it's very difficult. I felt for the woman that was speaking, that lived across Toloso Road, and she didn't really have an idea of what was going on until she came to this meeting. And another thing that was concerning to me was she looked at y'all and said, is the police substation going anywhere? And the answer to her was no. And then I was reading the bond language, and the Annabelle Police Substation is definitely one of the bond issues, for at least the design and construction of a new Annabelle substation. So,
If it's approved, and that's why I didn't
Right.
really want to answer with, it could move, because
move.
until the election, it's a variable, we don't know. So
Right.
as of today, at the time the question was answered, that substation is remaining as is.
Yeah, well, I want to be as transparent as possible, because like I said, stated earlier, everybody's got to play in the sandbox together.
Yes, sir?
And then it's our responsibility to keep that sandbox as clean as possible and comfortable for everybody, so.
Understood, not a problem.
Thank you. Any other discussion? None? Okay, we will adjourn from the Planning Commission and convene to the Airport Zoning Commission. Gina, can we have a roll call, please?
Chairman Zarguni,
Present.
Vice Chairman Miller,
Present?
Commissioner York,
Present.
Commissioner Mandel is absent, Commissioner Salazar Garza,
Here.
Commissioner Munoz,
Here.
and Commissioner Motagi.
Here.
Quorum established.
Thank you. At this time, does anyone would like to speak regarding the public comments, regarding general public comments? None. We're moving on to the approval of the absences for Commissioner Miller and York. Have a motion.
motion that we,
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the approval of the airport zoning meeting for July 27, 22. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve minutes.
I'll second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the briefing on airport zoning. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Andrew Demas with Development Services. I know first pitch is coming up in 45 minutes. This is very much a brief. It's not a long presentation, and I'll keep it very conversational in that. So as you know, we went through the adventure together that is the military overlay this past spring going into summer, what an adventure it was. Now, that was phase one. Phase two is now looking to how do we apply something similar to the Corpus Christi International Airport, CCIA, that is also going to cover land use, lighting, noise, those very same issues that we covered on the military side, we also need to cover on the civilian side. Now, instead of creating another military overlay, fortunately, the state of Texas has granted us with airport zoning requirements that this board, with your other planning commission hat, now AZC hat, will cover. Now, instead of just kind of springing it on you, I thought, let's take a different approach this time, and I'd rather start with the foundation of what does this board do as an AZC, and what are the powers granted via the requirements within the Texas Local Government Code and statute. So I'll be going through that. It's part of your packet. If you didn't see it on the Legistar link, I listed all 14 pages that's from the Texas Local Government Code. I'm not going to bore you with reading all those 14 pages because it gets into the minutia. If you're a municipality above a certain size, below a certain size, there are certain rules that apply. But if you do have the few minutes to read and go through it, it is a relatively short read when you take out what doesn't really apply to a city of our size. Then it isn't a lot to go over. But it would kind of set the tone of where we would go in next steps if we want to create overlays specifically for Corpus International as an airport zoning district. So that being said, as far as what establishes the AZC, of course, everything starts within the city's municipal code under Chapter 2, and that brings up directly the packet that you'll see is Chapter 241 of the Texas Local Government Code. Of course, that pops up at the worst time. Let's see. Go back one more slide. Okay. Composition, of course, is 9 members of 3-year terms. You have a chair, vice chair, and then you have 4 ex officio officers. Director appointee of Development Services. You have the Director of Planning and ESI, the Director of Corpus International, which is now called Aviation, so that's a minor amendment we'll need to make in the Muni Code at some point. And then, of course, is a gentleman from Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, who also serves as the ex officio, Ben Pollock, who also serves as ex officio on the Planning Commission. Of course, they would only be present really when voting takes place. They are non-voting members. They're there to provide information as needed. Moving on to what are the powers, again, established in 241 Texas Local Government Code. The purpose, of course, is to take into consideration, very much like the military overlay, what are the flight training missions and the civilian missions that occur out of Corpus International. Now, why do I say mission? It's because regardless if you're military or civilian, all flight traffic is still controlled by the FAA. The control tower is still the same personnel. It doesn't change just because you are in a uniform versus a civilian airport. It is still all FAA required. So you'll see in Chapter 241 a mirroring of language that you would see in the military overlay or the ACUs. Now, similarly, and I picked the most important definitions out of 241. There's 15 or so listed. You'll see very familiar terms again. Compatible land use. That is where, just as we looked in the ACUs, what are those uses that could potentially endanger health, safety, welfare of persons or property? Is it due to noise, vibrations, light, traffic? All those things would come into play. And then controlling compatible land uses. And that key word is compatible. That is, again, where you have to make the decision what is at risk, under the hazard language, what ACUS calls the installation compatibility use zones, meaning what is most compatible again, versus what is in danger. All of those things would take into account, very similarly like ACUs, there are specific distance requirements, and you will measure in a rectangular form from the center line of runway. So just as ACU says you must walk out 5,000 feet for an APZ2 or 3,000 for APZ1, similarly, there are measurements that are established based on the center line of the runway to create similar patterns. So it'll look very familiar when we get to that stage. Part 2 gets into hazard zoning regulations. What is the area? Again, the JLUS, which I also included as part of your packet, so when you have time to kind of refresh yourself. I know it's been around since 2013. It's a little bit longer of a read, but there's a lot of good information in there because time was taken to really dedicate what initial steps do we need to take to get us to more of a first-class city. And I say that meaning MCAOD, the military overlay, was an amazing step, really put us on the right track. Now that we've covered what is most at risk, we can take a second look at the airport, which is the next phase. That, again, puts us on track. At the back of the JLUS, there is a list of recommended steps, and it very much said, CCIA, first, secure your military. Second, look at your airport as step 2. So that's where we look at under those zoning regulations, which land uses do we want to permit, very similarly to the military overlay. When we talk about heights of structures, the types of structures, that's when you can sort of get into some materials. And then those that may create obstructions to flight operations. Nina and I can tell you firsthand of a couple of zoning cases from, it's been about 4 years now, where it got into navigation easements and protecting the installation of lights as you came up into the runway. Everyone who's driven to Robstown knows that there is a specific dip of the height of even TxDOT lights because it's right on that runway path. That's where these type of regulations will come into play to protect those assets. Next would be compatible land use zoning. Similarly with the MCAOD, that is where we may say in the subzone 1, we want to reduce density up to a certain amount, or we want to prohibit, let's say, things that congregate a certain occupancy above a certain level. That would happen in that section. The last section is probably the most challenging, and that is zoning within the ETJ, meaning typically cities are limited to only zone within their city limits. You can't zone outside of it. Something that's different about AZCs is that you can establish a form of zoning into the county areas, meaning not every area that's under the ACUs today, or in this case, safety subzone, is in the city limits, meaning we don't have control over zoning as you wore your hat as planning commission. You could potentially establish zoning requirements to cover areas that are outside of the city limits but are still within that safety subzone, meaning you can still apply density, meaning if somebody tried to find a way to get onto a large well and build a massive septic system and put all these apartments, they potentially could not do so if you're successful in establishing these rules. I doubt that would seriously ever happen, but the rules of zoning exist, much similar like we had before. We have to take into account all the potential possibilities that could happen, not just the likely ones. But
Andrew, can I ask a question on that?
please.
How does that get enforced? Because if somebody's in the county, my understanding, they don't actually have to pull a building permit, so how would, where would they come to some submittal where someone says, oh, you can't do this?
Well, it would be enforced through civil action. So it's a zoning. It could be enforced through civil action.
Now, of course, we're making policy adjustments in other arenas, for instance, access to utilities, meaning if the use is so large that it demands access to city utilities, you'll more than likely be annexed anyway. So there's a few different triggers that we can take as avenues to enforcing regulations. Now, this is just a refresher of the safety subzone within the JLUS, and that, of course, covers the area. What you see on the left-hand side is the map, and as you can see, it's a fairly large area, almost a good amount of the city, a third, it seems, at times, of what's actually covered in the military compatibility area, and that's what was discussed again in the JLUS. Now, what we're focused on the most are the blue boxes towards the center, which show the actual flight patterns of the two main runways. The reason I didn't highlight this one on this side of the screen is that was designed for a future runway that is on an extremely long-term plan, meaning someday we may get to that point of needing that extra one runway, but we're not there yet. The ones we do need to focus on are these two that crisscross the screen. And as you can see, it has a green loop and an orange loop. The orange loop is, of course, signifying noise, just like we did in the military overlay. The green loop is to signify areas of vertical obstruction. Again, just like we did in the military overlay, those that get into the 200, 300-foot clearance could be an issue. Now, the advantage that we had in around Cabinets and Waldron is we didn't have to deal with smokestacks or refinery row. Really only cell towers were the biggest concern. Those refineries that may exist that are on a very small scale within the city limits, most of them exist in the industrial district, so fortunately we don't have to deal with it. But it's something to think about, that when we get to that step, there are going to be industrial uses that may get into something that may not have to be a height challenge, but for instance, I had a zoning case across from Corpus International that was aluminum recycling. Won't have a lot of height, does produce a lot of dust. So that was a concern that came up at that time back in 2015 of how much dust would be created during the process of crushing all of this metal, and could it potentially be a hazard to both mechanical and visibility issues of any planes crossing overhead. Luckily, that was worked out through a special permit, and they have certain hours of operation and have to use certain mitigations to keep the dust down. But I say all of that to say that that's just one of the issues that comes up, similar to the military overlay, of why we not only need to look at density of land uses, but all the other ancillary side effects of certain land uses. This is just a wider shot to show you, again, I know it's a little hard to see, but the two main runways crisscross like this. This extra one off to the side is the future that I'm sure someday will happen, won't be within probably my career time, but at some point in the future may happen. But the ones that we need to focus on are the ones in blue. With that, that is just, again, a baseline. It's to get the juices flowing and the thoughts going on our next steps of creating an airport zoning district. This is something I hope we can embark upon this coming quarter and move forward, and so we can set again another baseline. So we did a great job on military overlay. Now it's phase 2. Any questions?
Commissioner York.
Not so much a question, just a comment. As we go in this, I think this is a great idea. I just really hope that as staff puts together all the guidelines for this, that it's not a copy-paste of the military one, because the uses are so different. These aren't 20-year-old kids learning how to fly and doing loops all day long. It's, totally different. And I'm assuming staff will look at other cities that have large airports and what they're doing versus the military. And
absolutely. We've started the conversations with aviation already as it is internally. We don't want to rain on their parade because I know they're in a rapid expansion of getting more flights, but it's the perfect timing. As they're expanding operations, we have a chance to say, what type of uses do we think is compatible? What uses do we want to encourage? So there's a benefit to say, if we want to have more industrial types of uses, we can channel those uses in that direction rather than say, oh, you need to stay out of certain parts of the city. There's a good balance to it. So there's an ancillary benefit.
Okay. And I would like to see when y'all do your presentation, I know there's some military traffic out of that airport. I'd be interested to know how much and what, if it's training or if it's just flights,
The last I heard, it was half of the flight operations. I know that balance will change as we expand commercial operations. It's going to shift far more civilian traffic. A lot of the weekend missions occur at CC International, so one tower only has to remain operating. They don't have to operate both CC International and the Naval Air Station at the same time, which is what they do almost every day. The weekends, it's just CCIA that's operating. But the last that I heard, it's about half of flight operations is military or government related out of Corpus International.
Do we know those half that are military, are they the typical loop training exercises like we see, or are they something different?
It's both. So within that section of the pie chart, a percentage are the T-34s or T-2 Texans that are doing their normal training, and then of course you have Homeland Security, Customs, Coast Guard are also operating out of International Airport.
Okay. And what's with the aviation? Are they not CCIA anymore?
It's on paper they're called the Aviation Department. I think it's their facility is CCIA,
Okay.
and I know it has to deal somehow with the organizational structure, but officially it's the Department of Aviation.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other question? None, okay. Thank you, Mr. Dimas.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Any director report? Any future agenda item, commissioners? None, we are adjourned.